Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Alberto Echegaray, President of Invest. On behalf of the board members of Invest, I'm pleased to extend the warmest of welcomes to all of you attending Chile Day London 2023. We are delighted to have such a distinguished gathering of financial leaders, public authorities, financial regulators, and entrepreneurs joining us today. Special thanks Mr. Mario Marcel, Minister of Finance, Mrs. Rosana Costa, Governor of the Central Bank of Chile, Mr. David Rudley, Under-Secretary of State of UK, Senator Paulina Bodanovich, and Senator Rodrigo Galilea, Mrs. Solange Bernstein, President of the Financial Market Commission, Mr. Osvaldo Macías, Superintendent of Pensions, Mr. José Miguel Benavente, Executive Vice President Corfo, Mrs. Claudia Sangüesa, Under-Secretary Foreign Economic Relations. Thanks to the UK and Europe business community members who show up today, and thanks to every Chilean who traveled from Chile to London. We are deeply, deeply grateful for all of you for being here and for efforts to join us today. Gathering here requires a lot of work, commitment, and resources. Thanks to the Minister of Finance of Chile, the Embassy of UK, the Embassy of Chile, Corfo. Also, we want to thank our main sponsor, HSBC, as well as the other sponsors. Thanks for your confidence and support. After several years coming to London, Chile Day is already a well-known event. It is the most relevant Chilean public-private forum abroad that connects the Chilean private financial sector, public authorities, and financial regulators with the main financial markets in the world, New York, Toronto, and London. But it's fair to ask why it is necessary to be here in London every year. Well, we do believe that coming on a yearly basis is required to achieve three main goals. Let me explain each briefly. First, to promote Chilean capital markets, financial services, and business opportunities. In recent decades, our capital market has played a fundamental role in the development of Chile, financing family projects, financing SMEs, and financing listed and non-listed companies. There are plenty of examples. Not only highways, airports, and utility infrastructure have been possible thanks to a capital market that offers sophisticated and long-term financing, but also Chilean families have acceded long-term mortgages under favorable conditions compared to the rest of Latin America. The second goal of the Chile Day is to encourage accountability. Accountability of our market standards, accountability of our regulatory framework, and accountability of recent public policies related with our capital market. There is no better way to demonstrate this accountability, commitment, than to show you here, face-to-face, tete-a-tete, to the London business community, the state of our economy and the state of our financial sector, presenting highlights, step forwards, as well as challenges ahead on a yearly basis. And the third reason, the why it's important to be here, is to support conversations about relevant public policies. Every country and every market face challenges ahead. Chile is currently confronting several ones. For that reason, we encourage independent, non-partisan, and public-private conversations about the leading public policies challenges required by our economy. In this Chile Day in London, we will hold dialogues about relevant topics including green mining, tax reform, open banking, investment return and pension funds, financial market infrastructure, constitutional and political challenges, financial regulatory development, green hydrogen, power industry, investment funds, and venture capital opportunities. A final idea. I mentioned before how important has been the capital market for Chile's development, but nobody can take this for granted. Evidence has shown us, all of us, how fragile financial markets are, how easily misguided legislative initiatives can disrupt them, and how painful those bad initiatives can be for the more financially needed people. It seems critical to consider the potential risk of any reform and the need to implement protections to avoid negative externalities on the capital market. It is mandatory for all of us, public authorities, private sector, and civil society, to take care of the Chilean capital market and to promote the continuous consolidation and competitiveness of our economy. It is our duty with Chile and its people. Thank you all again for being here. Now let me introduce Mónica Dube. Mónica Dube is the CEO of HSBC Bank Chile, with more than 25 years of experience in financing and investment banking. She has worked in Luxembourg, Germany, New York, and Chile. In Chile, she was representative and country manager of BNP Paribas for 8 years before joining the HSBC Group in 2011 as the head of global banking. In September 2016, Mónica was appointed CEO of HSBC Bank Chile. She studied in Germany and holds a degree in business administration. Mónica.
We tested and you can see me, which is important, and I can see you. Good afternoon to everybody, authorities, Minister of Finance, Governor of the Central Bank, ladies and gentlemen. As Alberto mentioned, my name is Mónica Dube. I'm CEO of HSBC in Chile. It is an honor and a pleasure for us as HSBC to act once again as lead sponsor of this prestigious event in London, a tradition that we highly value. I would like to thank the Chilean Ministry of Finance and Invest for the opportunity to once again be part of this fantastic event. I would also like to acknowledge the British and Chilean authorities that are taking part in the event, as well as all the business leaders, regulators, industry experts, and market participants, as well as members of many different companies and funds. For all of you who are with us today in London, physically, we had 13 years of Chile Day with 2 pauses, which was the pandemic. One we did remotely, and it's not the same. It was definitely good to have an alternative during the pandemic, but it's fantastic to be back physically in London. We also have an audience online who we welcome very dearly, and it's a platform that will stay, and it's very relevant to make Chile Day known in Chile and through other platforms, because they are definitely contributing to this event. So welcome to all of you to Chile Day 2023. This year is a special year because this edition marks 200 years of bilateral relationships between Chile and Great Britain. HSBC is 150 years old, and we have been active in Latin America for over 100 years. So the relationship that the countries started with diplomatic relationships was very soon taken up by large corporations, banks that basically facilitated the trade and the development of the nations. And we hope to continue being an important part of this in Latin America and the world. As a financial institution that has been involved in fostering business between both countries, Chile and the UK, for many decades, this is an anniversary that we celebrate greatly. Currently, the UK and Chile are working together on an important agenda that includes building a green economy, innovating in financial markets, and promoting trade between the nations. Those topics are the core of HSBC strategy and priority and drive the way we do business in Chile and globally. We are proud to support the Republic of Chile and many public and private corporations every day to progress towards these goals. On that note, it is my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Mario Marcel, for his keynote presentation. Mr. Marcel is the Minister of Finance of Chile since 2022 and has previously served as Governor of the Central Bank of Chile since 2016. Mario Marcel is a recognized and distinguished economist with a long trajectory of public service, and it is an honor to welcome him as a speaker for this plenary session. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here in London again in a Chile Day organized by Invest and sponsored by HSBC. I should say that if Chile Day London is a tradition, it is basically because Invest has made it so by being very persistent over the years, having a very well-organized event and bringing together people that come from different strands of economic life. And I particularly value the ability to bring together Chilean business people, Chilean politicians, authorities, regulators, and so in an opportunity to join forces together to bring the most balanced picture that we can give of the Chilean economy. My presentation today is about rebalancing the Chilean economy and to build a better future. And I think this brings together two strands of public policy. On the one hand, a shorter run macro policy that has been geared towards stabilizing the economy after all the shocks that they have suffered, that are part of an overall volatility that the world has experienced. But also, once you begin making progress on that, you have a chance of raising your sight and looking ahead, not just at what happens next year or the year after, but also, but especially what comes into an emerging economy like Chile in the future. So that is what I will try to present here, if this works. Okay, you hear me over there? There we are. All right. So first of all, on stabilizing the economy and rebuilding buffers, of course, there is a lot of ground that we have covered since the global crisis of COVID-19, that in our case was preceded by social unrest of unexpected proportions. So it's been 4 years since then, and Chile was confronted by 2022 when the current government took over with escalating inflation triggered by a procyclical fiscal policy, pension fund withdrawals, all of that injected some 35% of GDP into households in a little more than a year. So there was an expansionary shock that was unsustainable and created a lot of overheating in the economy and pushed inflation up further than in other countries in the world. So at this time, when inflation has been increasing quite substantially everywhere, in the case of Chile, inflation went up even further because of the policies of 2022. So before 2022. So in 2022, monetary policy and fiscal policy combined to stabilize the economy. The central bank started raising the policy rate already in July 2021. And the fiscal policy joined in 2022 with a major fiscal adjustment that has paid off in two fronts. First of all, because inflation has declined, the latest inflation, the latest CPI reading is nearly a third of what it was in August last year, but also because the adjustment was quite soft compared to the size of the disequilibria that from where we started. The economy has undergone a necessary adjustment, and we can safely forecast that by the end of this year, the level of activity in the economy will already exceed its level from a year ago. Annual inflation will be close to 4% annually, and the current account deficit will recover its historical average of around 3% of GDP compared to the 10% that we had in the third quarter, in the year up to the third quarter of last year. So that is quite a substantial economic adjustment. I mean, for all of you that have seen some of the efforts in a number of places in the world, this shows that acting early and acting in a coordinated way really pays off, and also that public policy can make a lot in order to cushion some of the unwanted social effects of such adjustment. Of course, there are a number of remaining challenges, fostering employment, recovering private investment. All of that are still things that where we need to see further progress. The normalization of monetary policy will support the recovery of investment, and of course that will move us to a different stage in the evolution of the economy. So here is a very, very straightforward summary of the evolution of the Chilean economy, with the blue or the black line showing the evolution of the level of GDP, and the green line, the inflation. So for, I think, and any follower of macro policy, once you saw this initial half of the chart, you would have expected economic activity to decline much more steeply, but in the end, we had a pretty stable evolution of that, and I think that speaks very positively of the way in which macro adjustment has operated. And there we have in the dotted lines where more or less we can expect to be by the end of the year. Of course, the governor of the central bank will have the opportunity to elaborate much more than I on monetary policy. But as you know, monetary policy reached its peak in October 2022, remained with a policy rate of 11.25 until July 2023. Then the central bank started a gradual easing of monetary policy that has brought down the policy rate by 175 basis points already, and is expected to continue through all the way through the end of the year, where the policy rate is expected to be close to 8% or less. In the case of fiscal policy, after the expansion of 2021, fiscal adjustment was quite substantial. I remember that when we were here last year, some of you may have been skeptic about the possibility of generating an overall surplus in the public accounts. That in the end it happened. Public spending contracted by 23% in real terms, and during this year has expanded very moderately at less than 1% real. and that amounted to one of the largest fiscal consolidations in the world in 2022. That effort, that sort of front-loading fiscal adjustment, was very central to the macro policy of the government. We thought that after, with the degree of overheating in the economy, we had to act promptly. Of course, we follow what had been drafted in the budget for 2022, but of course, it's different to draft or to announce such a contraction in public spending, and quite another to implement it. So that is essentially what happened last year. And what is interesting is that this fiscal consolidation happened without a major social cost. In the chart on the left, you see the results of the recent CACEN household survey that shows that by the end of 2022, poverty had declined to 6.5% of the population. That is quite substantially below the crisis levels, but also below the level of 2017. So that means that, and given that a major part of that was due to support from the government, that means that in 2022, we were able to focus, to target support on poorer households that delivered this result. If we look into the future, if we're able to combine more dynamism in labor incomes and support from government, we can make additional progress in reducing poverty and reducing inequality in the Chilean economy. Of course, with the macro policy that we implemented, and even though poorer households kept relatively stable their overall monetary incomes, consumption experienced a substantial adjustment. Private consumption, as you see in the chart on the left, particularly on durables, went even below the pre-pandemic levels after expanding quite substantially because of all the injection in liquidity into households. But what is interesting is that the adjustment in wholesale and retail trade that follows pretty much the evolution of consumption didn't drag down other sectors. And as you see in the chart on the right, other sectors like services, manufacturing, and other goods remain much more stable, and some of them actually recovering, like services that were, of course, badly hit by the COVID-19 crisis. Inflation, I just mentioned that, is now down to 5.3% year on year. And as you see in this chart, a component of inflation, particularly the core inflation measure, that for a few months created some concern because it looked more inflexible than overall inflation, is going down now, pretty much following with a lag the reduction in overall inflation through indexation. That is, of course, is an important component of the Chilean price structure. Unlike what is happening in a number of other countries where core inflation still remains relatively rigid, in the case of Chile, core inflation is going down as well. The current account of the balance of payments at the same time is improving pretty fast. I mentioned that in the year ending on the third quarter of 2022, it reached nearly 10% of GDP. Now it's down to a little more than 4%, and it will continue in that declining trajectory towards the end of the year. The trade balance has supported that, but also it's important to note that another aggregate that created some concern, that is national savings, are recovering as well, and that is providing support to the improvement of the current account balance. That improvement in national savings is partly reflecting the evolution of fiscal policy, because a part of the decline in domestic savings were the large deficits of 2020 and 2021, then moving to an overall surplus. But also there are a number of other components of savings that have been improving. Of course, there is still room to improve compared to the historical average, but the trajectory is pretty clear from what you see there in the chart. FDI has experienced a strong recovery, and the capital outflows that were pretty high in 2019 and 2020 during the crisis, and then again at the beginning of 2022 are now down, not yet at historical levels, but shrinking quite substantially compared to that time of large capital outflows. That, of course, is partly reflecting the decline in uncertainty in the Chilean economy. You see there the measure that is produced by the central bank, and you see how, due to a number of factors, including the commitment to fiscal responsibility, the rejection of 3 new attempts at pension fund withdrawals, and the evolution of the political situation, all of them have contributed to bring uncertainty down. Still, we are a few points from levels prior to the social unrest, and I would expect that to further decline towards the end of this year, once the constitutional process is over one way or another. One thing that we know for sure is that by the end of the year, the constitutional process will end, either by approving a new constitution or by rejecting that and remaining with the current one, and stopping this process that has been aiming at replacing the constitution, and perhaps moving towards something much more targeted, based on the normal process through Congress. Financial markets have also reflected the evolution of uncertainty in the economy. That is reflected in the yield on longer-term bonds, on the exchange rate, and CDS. Chile is now again at the lowest in Latin America on sovereign risk, and in the case of long-term yields on bonds, some of the increase up to mid-2022 has reverted completely. In the case of the exchange rate, something similar, but of course, in the last few weeks, we have seen some substantial movements reflecting the difference, or the difference in the direction of monetary policies in the US and in Chile. And of course, there is a discussion on how far that may be overshooting or not. We prefer not to intervene in that discussion, but I think it's what is more important is the trend that we have followed, and how the depreciation of the Chilean currency reversed itself over the last year. In the case of stock markets, they also show risk aversion compared to last year. In the last few weeks, of course, the perception of risk overall in the economy has changed, that has moved Chilean markets as well. And in the case of price-earning ratios, we also see some recovery, but with some headroom to evolve in the near future. Fiscal policy in 2023, and then in the budget that we will submit by the end of this year, will be fully compliant with the trajectory set in May 2022, according to our structural balance rule, or cyclical adjusted balance rule, and that will keep debt to GDP well below the 45 ceiling that was added to our fiscal policy framework at the beginning of the current administration. And then in terms of economic activity, activity grew in the first half of 2023 compared to the end of last year. We had the growth in the first quarter, compared to the last quarter of last year, then some decline in the second quarter, then we will should continue to improve. And there you see how the expectations have changed. By the beginning of this year, the Chilean economy was expected to contract by 1.5%. Now all the forecasts are around 0 or a few basis points higher or lower, but I think that you can see a clear shift there in growth expectations. And then for 2024, expectations are currently around 2% or slightly higher, and we will see as we move ahead how far that adjusts over time. But of course, 2024 will be a year when we will begin to recover growth, but the speed at which that happens, of course, will depend on a number of other variables. Now, a lot of discussion in Chile. We have had a lot of discussion on, whether we are growing, whether we have a problem with growth, why people are not sufficiently concerned with growth. But sometimes we forget that nearly 2 years ago, we knew that the economy had to undergo substantial adjustment. That adjustment has happened, and when we pull together all the last few years from 2019 to 2023, we see that in Chile, of course, the distribution of economic activity or the evolution of economic activity year on year has been different from other countries, but overall, we will accumulate an annualized GDP change between 2019 and 2023 of 1.8%, which is pretty close to the average of that list of countries that we usually compare with, that is larger economies in Latin America, some emerging economies, and some natural resource-based developed economies as well. And is on the side of some of the challenges ahead, employment creation is one of those. Labor demand has slowed down after recovering significantly after the economic crisis. By this time, formal salaried employment is above pre-pandemic levels, and the recovery of contract employment made a substantial part of the recovery of overall employment after the crisis. But in the last few quarters, we have seen a slowdown of labor demand indicators that reflect pretty much the slowdown of economic activity or even the decline in a few quarters. So as usually, labor markets follow the economic activity with a lag. It looks like that is pretty much what is happening in Chile. So we will see probably a weak labor market for a while, but again, much better than what was forecasted some time ago. And we will probably start seeing a decline in the overall unemployment rate once the positive seasonality begins to operate. Lending rates have started to decline, but of course remain pretty high for historical records. Further easing of financial conditions should support investment in 2024. Private investment has, or overall investment has exceeded expectations both in 2022 and is doing the same in 2023. But of course, that is surprising in the sense of not declining. But of course, for an economy like Chile, you should expect a growth especially after the kind of adjustment that we had in the course of the crisis, and that is what we should work towards in the next few years. So from there, we can move to what we are doing now precisely in that direction, how we are working towards fostering economic growth and fiscal sustainability, given that both in the end evolve hand in hand. So there is a lot of text here that I will not repeat, But basically, I would say that economic growth is necessary to improve the well-being of Chilean people. It is also important to increase public revenues. And even though the current administration started with a very weak approach to economic growth, and that has strengthened quite substantially over time. And today that is pretty much reflected in the fiscal covenant agenda that is proposed by the government and that is under discussion with political parties and economic actors. In particular, the government has proposed a set of 38 pro-growth measures grouped into fostering private and public investment, increasing productivity and reducing informality. If we want this to make an impact, a lasting impact on economic activity, of course, we need some of these measures to address more structural features of the Chilean economy. There are a number of other topics in the fiscal covenant agenda: public spending needs and priorities, state reform and transparency, the boosting economic growth, principles for a modern tax system, compliance with tax responsibilities, and also reforming the tax regime. And then we are also proposing a number of mechanisms to track, monitor, and evaluate this fiscal covenant. There you see a picture of one of the meetings that we have had. It is already 4 meetings with representatives of all political parties. All those meetings have been extremely productive and cooperative, and we are very optimistic about the outcome. Of course, it is important that the government brings proposals to a discussion like that. In the case of boosting economic growth, we are proposing a number of measures on rationalizing regulations on investment projects, creating tax incentives for private investment, creating opportunities for productive diversification, increasing productivity, boosting public investment, and reducing informality and incentives, and creating incentives for formalization. That is a part of what is being proposed. And then I will elaborate a little on some of those, particularly in the case of streamlining regulations. I think it's pretty fair to say that in Chile, regulations around the investment permits have increased quite substantially. They have grown in a disorganized way, so to speak. Regulations have been issued by a number of different bodies, basically thinking or looking at their own mandates, but not having an overall picture of what those mean for investments. So we are now committed to elaborate a comprehensive reform for the processing of sectoral permits for investment. In the case of environmental licenses, the Ministry for the Environment is working on a reform of the environmental impact assessment system that will eliminate the political body or the committee of ministers at the end of the process, and will shorten a number of steps in environmental regulations. We also have singled out maritime concessions and national monuments as areas that concentrate a lot of the delays in the approval of investments or accumulate many projects that are under scrutiny. And finally, we intend to develop metrics to assess and follow on the progress on these measures. In the case of fiscal incentives to investment and productivity, we have a long list. Of course, this list is part of the proposals for tax reform that we will start discussing at the end of this month. But these include a fund for tax credits on investments with a multiplier effect, including a positive multiplying effect on the environment, tax benefits for private research and development spending, the development rate that can be discharged on the basis of investments in productivity and workers' training, incentives for investment of small and medium enterprises, semi-instant depreciation of capital, of fixed capital goods, a temporary reduction of the stamp duty tax, and then we have a number of other proposals to develop venture capital, to develop a national care system that is able to prompt to increase women's labor participation, an agenda of 17 initiatives to reduce informality, including a new path of entrepreneurship for micro, small, and medium enterprises. The infrastructure plan for public-private partnerships has been sort of rebuilt after all the activity at the end of the previous administration. Right now, the portfolio is of $13.3 billion with 43 tenders and 52 projects in the areas of roads, airports, cities, and now we have added also water security to include desalination plants as part of this PPP agenda in Chile. Some of these steps, and also I would say especially the progress in the royalty on mining and progress in stabilizing economy is already reflecting in the pipeline of investments in Chile. Here you see the survey of the Capital Goods Corporation that increased from March 23 to June 23 by more than $9 billion, $9.7 billion, 35% up, mostly concentrated on mining. So that means that, of course, these are investments that are distributed between 2023 and 2027. That is a 5-year span. Most of the increase is concentrated in 2025, and that is reflected a number of projects that are maturing to be integrated into this survey. As I said in the panel earlier today on mining, even though the largest part of this increase is concentrated in mining with more than $7 billion in new projects, we can expect another $7 billion in projects that are now moving towards its final phases, either corporate or regulatory, to be integrated into this pipeline. So we can expect a further increase from here to the end of the year or the beginning of 2024. So that gives you an idea of how seriously and systematically we're trying to address economic growth needs. But I think we need a longer term view to think about economic growth in Chile. And here the opportunities to increase potential growth pretty much lie in a number of areas that where new opportunities are emerging, are coming to the country as a result of overall changes in the world economy, where Chile is particularly well positioned to take advantage of. Of course, the background of this is that the potential growth in Chile declined quite substantially between 2005 and 2023. We moved from a little more than 5% potential growth to less than 2.5% in a 15-year time. Of course, that is a steep decline. And a large part of that is due to a stagnant productivity over a decade. So in the last 10 years, productivity, overall productivity for the non-mining economy has grown nearly zero. And of course, being so important as a determinant of longer-term growth, of course, productivity is central to, on the one hand, to understand how the Chilean economy has evolved, but also on what we need to do to increase our growth potential in the future. Now, increasing growth potential is not easy. There are not many countries that do that in their economic life. But if we compare Chile with other countries with a similar level of per capita GDP or similar level of development, we see that there are a number of them that expect for the next few years more growth than in Chile. That is reflected in the chart on the right. So there are the different colors, and actually it's not the key to the colors, I believe. Well, I would say I can tell you that the pink dots are for emerging European countries. The green dots are for Latin American countries, and then all the blue dots, I believe that were for Asian countries. So you see that there are a number of countries that expect the economy to grow on average faster than in Chile for the next few years. So the question is how or what we need to do to join that group to move up in this scale. And I think that very central to that is our ability to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming to us in 5 areas that are all of them related to global developments. The world movement towards a more sustainable economy, towards raising environmental standards, reducing carbon emissions, mean that there is a strong demand for metals that are associated to that, particularly to copper and to lithium. And at the same time, there is a stronger appreciation and a substantial technological change on renewable energies, and then the opportunities to produce green hydrogen. Finally, the digital economy is also accelerated its development during the crisis, and also creates some opportunities for Chile. So in all these 5 areas, we will see in a minute that Chile has a number of comparative advantages, but the important thing here is to set ourselves certain goals that we would like to achieve. So in the case of green mining, a major challenge to us will be to increase copper production in the way that Cochilco, our specialized government agency on copper, is forecasting on the basis of investment projects. Cochilco, as we will see in a minute, is planning or is expecting production of copper to grow by nearly 1 million tons from 2022 to 2026. So, but of course that growth is not granted. There are a number of things that need to happen to that. Some of the investments that are already underway have to mature and operate. And then, of course, we will need some further impulse from new greener projects. In the case of lithium, as you know, we already have only two exploitations in the Atacama Salar, but we have set to ourselves the target to have 3 or 4 new projects under development from here to 2026. In the case of renewable energies, to reach a composition of the energy matrix of 2/3 compared to nearly 50% today. On green hydrogen, 10 or 12 projects under development, and on the digital economy for it to grow at 3 times the average growth of the economy. So in the case of copper, you see in the chart on the left how the demand for copper is expected to grow due to the green factor. This factor is now much stronger to any shorter development in some of the larger economies, the largest economies in the world. To many people, it may be surprising that in a context of many problems with the Chinese economy, the price of copper is not going down. Actually, also with the prospects of a recession in the US, you would normally expect a decline in terms of trade for Chile, but the terms of trade today are 20% above the historical average. So that is basically reflecting this more structural change in the world economy that is increasing the demand for copper, and it's managing to hold prices at the levels like the ones that we have today. Now, on the greening of the copper industry, we discussed a lot in the panel this morning. We have this desalination plants, water recirculation processes, renewable energy supply, stricter emission standards, more efficient or cleaner smelting plants. And you see there some cross-fertilization with other developments in the Chilean economy, like the production of renewable energies. Now, with the copper, the royalty on copper mining, that has removed an important source of uncertainty for this industry, and particularly, even though, of course, it has involved an increase in or a royalty that is higher than the previous tax, special tax on mining. We have also agreed on setting an overall tax burden for the mining industry that is reflected in this in the chart on the left, and that has been quoted as a positive example for other countries that are discussing this kind of tax measures. Alongside the passing of the royalty legislation, we also agreed to work with the industry and with regulators to shorten the permitting process. We are already working on that. We have been working on that for nearly 2 months, identifying where are the major bottlenecks. And there you see in the chart on the right, that an important part of that are in the period before construction and during the construction process. So that is part of the work that we are currently doing, and that should end up with a number of actions to concentrate and to reach this target. In the case of lithium demand, this is booming around the world due to electromobility. Chile is the second largest producer, leads in reserves internationally, and we have many salars with a potential for exploiting lithium. You see there in the right, of course, that the list is led by the Atacama Salar, but there are a number of other salars in the country. Overall, there are nearly 30 salars with a potential for lithium extraction. So that is a part of the background to the national lithium strategy that was proposed by the president a couple of months ago, and that is currently underway. That, of course, takes into account the particular nature of lithium according to Chilean legislation that reserves lithium for exploitation by the government. And with that insight, the strategy of the government has moved from the current arrangement of longer term rentals towards joint ventures with private investors. So now it's an important negotiation with Sokimich to extend the current agreement with the regulators under that structure. We're very optimistic about those developments, and at the same time, Codelco in particular is working to identify a number of other opportunities for business. Then on renewable energies, Chile has a number of comparative advantages from basically from nature. The Atacama Desert provides the highest photovoltaic potential in the world, and Patagonia has strong and constant winds that create great advantages for the generation of wind power. So with that, the plans or the developments in renewable energies include the far north and the far south of the country, and that has changed our energy matrix quite substantially already, but still has much more room to evolve. As I mentioned earlier, currently half of our energies come from renewable sources, but that should go to 2/3 by 2026 and nearly 85% by 2030. So that is a major change for an economy like Chile's that in the past used to depend a lot on imported oil to generate energy. And then now we're moving towards being in the way to become self-reliant on renewable energies, and then also to be able to export energy through green hydrogen. The former government drafted a green hydrogen strategy that the current administration has taken all together. We are translating that into an action plan for 2023 to 2030. And right now we have more than 50 projects that are under study across the country, and several pilot initiatives that are already operating. Some of the measures that are included in the Green Hydrogen Action Plan include the development environmental baselines so as to facilitate the environmental assessment process, a financial facility with the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the German Development Agency, the European Investment Bank, and CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, to provide $1 billion in credit and risk coverage, which are both pretty central to an industry that is under full development, and therefore where risks, of course, are important, and it's important to mitigate part of those risks to allow it to grow faster. There is a Magallanes regional transformation plan, a Green Corridors project agreed with Finland. There is a Ventana al Futuro, not Venta al Futuro. There is a small mistake there. We're not selling futures on green hydrogen, but actually it's called Ventana al Futuro, which is a plan to provide infrastructure for green hydrogen plants. And then ENAP, the oil state company, and the regional governments and the national governments are working towards generating the port infrastructure to be able to export green hydrogen in the future. In the case of the digital economy, the participation of the technological sector and private investment has been quite dynamic, even in a difficult context like the one that we have had over the last couple of years. And there are a number of instruments that are being developed to foster this process into the future. Increasing investment in science and technology to 1% of GDP, investing mining and lithium revenues in research and development, a public investment in connectivity to excluded areas, a submarine cable linking Asia Pacific and South America through Chile, and the expansion of training programs on digital skills to 50,000 people by 2026. All of those are part of a strategy to develop the digital economy. So, of course, foreign investment will be very important to materialize all of this, to capitalize on the progress that we're making on the macro economy, on the stability of the Chilean economy, but also on taking some of the opportunities or materializing some of the opportunities that are ahead of us. There are a number of strengths that we have. We are adding a number of new measures and instruments and incentives for foreign investment. But overall, I think that if you want to look at the Chilean economy, perhaps you have to ask how many countries you currently have in the world that can combine, first of all, to have done all their homework on the macro side, and then to have such a positive such promising opportunities linked to the development of the world economy ahead. I think there are not many economies that can combine those two features, and that's why we think that we are at the juncture where I think that all actors in Chile, politicians, members of parliament, economic agents, business associations, and of course the government need to work together to materialize this. If we can make progress on this, of course, this will not be an achievement for the government, but for the country as a whole, and for any future administrations and future businesses to develop in Chile. Thank you very much for your attention.